Hello and welcome to Digital Marketing This Week for June 28th, 2014. My name is Chris Mercer, and I'm actually one of the people who's responsible for the content production over at SeriouslySimpleMarketing.com, which of course is what helps to produce content for everything related to internet marketing. We try to focus on beginners to those who are a little maybe intermediate stage. So if you've got questions on WordPress, analytics, conversions, all that fun stuff, that's where you can find there. And of course, obviously this show, Digital Marketing This Week. Let's go ahead and go over how this show operates. We've got two parts. First, we're going to cover some news, trends, and tips that you can use. And that normally is about the first 20 minutes or so. During that part, we'll show you some links. They'll have them on the slides. Those are the links to a lot of the blog posts. And in the show notes, we'll also have additional links. Many of those, of course, will be affiliate links just because we're marketers as well. So if we mention some interesting tools that we think would be beneficial to you, we'll have links for those in the show notes. Now, the second part is reserved for our Digital Marketing This Week insiders. Now, those are the individuals who are on our notification list for the webinars that we do each week, and they have the privilege of being able to ask questions over just about anything related to internet marketing. So if you are not yet on that list, just go to SeriouslySimpleMarketing.com and you'll see a place to sign up to join the insiders. Now, if you are an insider and you'd like to get your question answered, now's the time to go to this URL right here, ssm.tips/question. It'll take you to a form, of course, where you can put your name in, make sure you put in the details of your question, be as detailed as you can. And obviously, if you want us to take a look at your website and you don't mind us putting it live, you can drop those details in there as well. Make sure you give us permission to put it live on the show. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk first about Conversion XL. Now, this is a pretty popular blog. It's one that we follow regularly, and it is probably, I can't say definitely, but it is, in my opinion, one of the top conversion blogs out there. So if you're interested in conversions, it's something to definitely keep on your list. They recently went over, and one of the reasons I like following this blog is because it's not a lot of fluff, right? I'm in conversions. That's pretty much what we do for a living for our high-end clients, and what Conversion XL is really, really good at doing is measuring stuff. They're not just going to throw up opinions and say, oh, use an orange button because that's what everyone's doing. They're going to come back and say, well, let's test this. Let's see what the numbers say. And what they did is they created a really nice blog post about pop-ups. And as you can tell by the title, it's in defense of the pop-ups. So they're actually defending the pop-ups. So you can kind of say, you know, they came and said pop-ups are a good thing. But what they did is they actually went through and they broke it down. So you have an example here of what Social Triggers, Derek Halpern over at Social Triggers uses. He uses a pop-up called provided by a company called Bounce Exchange. But basically it pops up and it says stuff like, you know, yes, download a free book, or no thanks, and it's got these little weird messages. And you're starting to see more and more of these, right? So where it says, no thanks, I'd rather just, you know, stick to my gut, or no thanks, I don't need traffic right now, or no thanks, you know, I realize that I'm an idiot for passing up on this offer. Like, you see people doing that stuff all the time. And one of the questions that Conversion XL was asking was, okay, well, is that something that's really necessary? Because you know, it's kind of like, okay, really? You know, let me just hit no. Why do you got to make me feel bad about it? And they actually went through and they measured and they pulled, this is from another example, but they pulled it here and said, you know, you got no thanks, no thank you, I'm not interested as options. And then you had no thanks, I prefer to pay full price for my clothing for this particular opt-in that they had measured. And they actually saw that the email rate was higher, right? So it worked better if you put something like no thanks, I prefer, you know, I want to pay full price for my stuff, or no thanks, I have enough traffic right now, or no thanks, I, you know, realize I'm passing up on this incredible deal. When you add things like that to your pop-up, that actually will help to improve the results. So one thing for those of you who are using pop-ups right now, if you have the ability to edit your no thanks button, that's something to go ahead and keep in mind. Now, the other thing that we hear often, and this is something that we're always curious about as well, is does it affect your bounce rate? Now, for those who don't know, bounce rate is basically when you come into a page. So when you first click into a page, it's the very first page of your visit. For example, if we are going through and you're searching for something about, you know, how to install WordPress, and you go to a particular page that talks about a program or a service where people will install WordPress for you, and that's not really what you wanted. You wanted the actual steps on how to use or how to install WordPress. So you back out. Okay, you instantly hit the back button, you go back to Google search. Well, for them, that's a bounce. So they had somebody come into the page, it was the very first page of their visit, and they bounced back out. They didn't click through anything else, they didn't click on any of their links, they didn't stick around for a while and read stuff, that's a bounce, okay? So what pop-ups, the theory, what you would expect, because we've all seen this where these pop-up comes up and you're like, ah. So what people thought was, okay, well, does bounce rate rise? Okay, so if I've got an average bounce rate of 70%, if I put a pop-up up, will I have like 80% or 90% of my people start bouncing? Because people just get upset and hit the back button. And they actually measured this, and this comes from a case study over at danzarella.com, this graphic what we've got up here. And basically what it shows is that the bounce rate essentially stayed the same. Very, very little difference in bounce rate. And subscription rate with a pop-up went up. So instead of 1.5% of visitors subscribing for their opt-in, they had a 3% opt-in rate with a pop-up, and it did not affect the bounce rate. So essentially, and you, if you think about this, when you go through and you are aware, hyper aware of how you interact with pop-ups, that's probably going to make sense, because when you think about it, you go through, you see a pop-up, your first instinct is never really to bounce back out of the page, it's to get rid of the pop-up. So you close the pop-up or whatever, and then you start reading. Some of you, like me, will opt in for things, for the particular pop-up, and that's why, of course, the subscription rate goes up. So something to consider, and again, in defense of using pop-ups. I know that as marketers, we can kind of feel that they're annoying, they provide a bad user experience, but results are there. Now, for those who are interested in kind of experimenting a little bit with pop-ups, maybe not putting down some money, you can use some free ones that are out there. Again, this was recommended on ConversionXL by AppSumo, the gentleman over at AppSumo, Noah Kagan, who actually is here in Austin as well. But they created this free plugin. It's called List Builder. So you can go there and just pop that up. Very, very quick little plugin to install. And actually, I'm going to go back. You can actually visit this one at sumome.com. So for those of you who are interested, you can go to sumome.com. And that's where that'll be. Another one, which is being used quite a bit, is over at codecanyon.com. And for those of you who are using WordPress and you're not familiar with Code Canyon, it's definitely someplace to check out, because Code Canyon has so many plugins, and it's a place where developers put their plugins. And when I say developers, I'm separating that out from marketers. So you've got marketers who develop plugins, and they market the crap out of them, right? So, and then you've got developers who have no idea about how to market. They don't want to market. They just want to get their stuff out there and make a little bit of money. And that's what Code Canyon is. So Code Canyon is kind of like a marketplace for them. So if you go to Code Canyon, you can search for a plugin called Pop-Up Press. You can see here it's 15 bucks. And it does a really great job of doing some simple pop-up stuff. You can use it not only for pop-ins for opt-in forms, but you could also use it for things like galleries for videos, even video galleries. If you wanted to, have, maybe you have an apartment complex or a hotel, and you wanted to show different videos of rooms or accommodations that you've got, you can actually do a pop-up for a video gallery and have people flip through the different videos there. So pretty cool little plugin. Again, relatively inexpensive if you wanted to practice a little bit with the whole pop-up idea. And then, of course, many have probably heard of pop-up domination. It was kind of one of the first in the industry that really went to advanced stuff with pop-ups. It is a little bit pricier, but still not too bad. Licenses go anywhere from 47 bucks up to 97 bucks, and that's just really based upon the number of sites you want to use it on. So unlimited sites versus just one site, 47 bucks. If you've got a bunch of different sites, do the $97 option. And pop-up domination's got a lot of different features where you can adjust. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And again, it is made for marketers. So if you are doing the pop-up specifically for online marketing, you might want to take a look at that. Next up, Smashing Magazine. Now, this was a really cool little blog post we found. This was all about how to speed up your WordPress website. And we get questions about this all the time. How do I speed up my site? How do I speed up my site? And so we wanted to pick out these. Actually, they went through 12 different ways. So we're going to cover those here. So the very first one, and this is one we didn't know about at all, which is great. So I love when we can find new stuff. This is identifying the plugins that are slowing you down, and then see if you really need to have them on your site. So there's a little plugin called P3, and if you just go to your WordPress, you can obviously just install that plugin, or first click Add New, and then search for just P3, the letter P, the number 3. And what it will do, and this is actually it will actually go through and it will show all the plugins. It basically scans your site, and what you're looking at on this video here is actually an image of what happens when it scanned our site over at SeriouslySimpleMarketing.com. So you can see the different plugins that we have, and then how much resources those particular plugins are taking, which was pretty interesting. So we can go through and say, okay, well, of that we can see, some of these plugins we may not need. So for example, we've got WP Legal Pages, which is a great little plugin to develop some, basic sort of disclaimer pages and stuff like that. But once they're developed, do we really need to have that one active? Probably not. So we can go through and we can deactivate that one and speed up the press a little bit. Other ones that do take up some resources, like WordPress SEO, well, that kind of makes sense because we want it doing its crunching of WordPress and SEO. So, but it is definitely an interesting thing. And as you can see, we didn't show it here, but they have a detailed breakdown. There's all sorts of a timeline of when the plugins come into play and when they start interacting with each other. But it's a really great idea to go through this and basically get a diagnostic view of how plugins are affecting your WordPress site. Next was compressing your WordPress site. Now, this one we have done, and if you are, depending on your host, this might already be done for you, but you should check it because we've had clients who don't have their sites compressed, and it's something called gzip, and it works like a zip file, right? So that's basically what it is, just like it zips up, just like a regular zip file where you would extract and it kind of compresses images and everything else. It does the same thing just or basically on a server for your website. And you can go to a site called checkzipcompression.com. So check, C-H-E-C-K, checkgzipcompression.com. And when you go there, you can basically type in your URL. As you can see here, we did that for ours. And it'll tell you if it's already set up to be enabled. And if it's not, there are very simple ways. You can just Google it or visit Smashing Magazine. I've got the link here on the slide, and it'll tell you exactly how to set that up. And a lot of times you can go to your host, especially HostGator, Bluehost, hosts like that, and just tell them, hey, I want gzip enabled if it's not already, and they'll walk you through it as well. But you can see just with our own site that we went from 32 megs to 8 megs, and it was almost a 74% decrease in size of the files that were being served, which was pretty amazing. So obviously the smaller the files that are having to be transferred back and forth, the faster everything loads. Next up, we're going to cover these a little bit faster here just for sake of time. We've got browser caching, and this is kind of basic, but I know some people that still don't have this or they just forgot to add it when they first did their WordPress sites. But you want to use a caching plugin on your WordPress site. And what this basically does is it will take WordPress, the way that it works and why it's slower than what a typical HTML site would be, is WordPress works with two different parts. There's files and there's a database. And so you've got files which contain things like your theme, and your theme tells WordPress or tells the site, okay, here's where to put everything, right? So here's how to make your titles, the style and the font. Here's how to put out your images and the style of the images and the size and all that sort of stuff. And then there's a database, and the database is where all that stuff is stored. So the database is where your titles are stored. It's where your copy, the main body copy is stored. It's where all your images are stored. And every time somebody loads up a page, WordPress builds that page for them. So it goes through and says, oh, somebody just came, and so we want to show them the blog post, and it goes to the database and pulls the title, and then it goes back to the database and it pulls the copy, and it goes back to the database and it pulls the images, and then the files sort of confirm everything, and it builds it really, really fast, but it still can take a few seconds. So you can shave those seconds off when you use a caching plugin. What a caching plugin basically does is take a snapshot of the page, and instead of having it being built over and over again in real time, it just sort of uses that snapshot, and maybe once a day, or once a month or whatever you set it to, once an hour, it will go through and it'll refresh its snapshot so that somebody is seeing your page, especially like a blog post. Blog posts don't change, right, for the most part, unless you go back and update them, obviously. But for the most part, blog posts don't change. And so you can take a static sort of snapshot of a blog post and then just display that. And even though the page isn't technically being built in real time, it doesn't look any different. The user actually has a better experience because it loads faster, and that's what the plugins will do. They're very, very simple to put in. The one that is recommended is WP Super Cache. There's also W3 Total Cache. They're both actually really, really good. So again, WP Super Cache and then W3 Total Cache are two plugins you want to take a look at for that. But just use one or the other. Never use both because they will have some conflicts otherwise. Next up is database cleanup. Now we talked about how WordPress has a database. That's where everything's stored. And when you're using your WordPress site, when it's got some age behind it and it's been around for a little while, you might have some junk stored in the database where people are, when you've deleted out old posts or old pages and no longer used, and maybe there's some artifacts of data that just isn't used anymore. Well, you can use a plugin called WP Optimize, and that will actually go through and clean up your database and then just kind of remove all sorts of extra tables that might still be there that aren't being used by plugins, all that sort of stuff. And essentially what this is doing is making your database smaller so that it's faster to find stuff because there's less of it to look through, and everything that you need is still there, everything you don't need is gone, so it's a little bit faster. Next is minifying CSS and JavaScript. Now, for a long time, I've actually done this. I had plugins there are plugins that do this. You can see here, Better WordPress Minify is the plugin that you can use for this. And we were just doing it because people just said, oh, we should go ahead and do it. And then we had no idea what minifying was. But what minifying is years later we learned, right? So minifying is basically where CSS, for those who aren't familiar, is basically a text file that tells the browser where to put everything, okay? That's all it really does, where to put everything. So what people will do, different plugins have CSS files, different themes have all their CSS files, WordPress has its CSS file, and there's all these literally separate CSS files, okay? A bunch of them all over the place, all over your site. What minifying basically does is put them all into one big gigantic CSS file. And then there's only one place to look for everything, as opposed to having to bounce around all the different places of your server. That's what CSS is all about, or what the minifying is all about, just putting them in one spot. Same thing with JavaScript. So you've got all these different JavaScript code that might be around, things like your analytics code. If you're using split testing programs like Visual Website Optimizer, they have JavaScript tracking. All that information, you can, instead of having separate all over different parts of your page, you can keep them in one file, and it loads all at the same time. So that's what this plugin will do, is kind of combine everything. Next up is turning off your pingbacks. Now, some people will keep these on because they figure it helps with backlinks. Okay, so people that can ping back to your site automatically gives you a link back to the site. For the most part, Google doesn't put a whole lot of, I guess, credibility toward those links anymore, because they can kind of look a little spammy. Like if you look at your comment section, which is where they'll show up most of the time, you'll see where it says such and such link back to, right in the middle of like real comments. And it's just weird to look at it and see that. And so again, back in the day, it was more for backlinks, not really used all that much anymore. User experience doesn't look all that great, especially when you have a really good comment discussion. And then in the middle, there's just like, such and such track back to, and it doesn't really, like, so what? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't add to the conversation. So just get rid of them. Just go to settings and then your discussion section of the settings in your dashboard, and you can just turn that off. And that will actually also help speed up your site as well. Next is specifying image sizes. So instead of having your browser try to figure out what the image size needs to be, just tell it. And that's in HTML. It does get a little more codey, but just in HTML, you can just you can actually just go back and specify the width and the height of the specific image. Now, the other thing about image sizes is make the image size whatever it's going to be. Like, have the actual real image that you're uploading and that you're installing be the as close as you can to the actual size of the image that you want it to be. Okay, so what I mean by that is a lot of people will go to Shutterstock or Deposit Photos or something like that and pull up images, right? So they get their stock images and they download them, and they might be 2,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. I mean, they're huge. They're physically that big. And then they will display it on their blog where the image is 300 pixels by 200 pixels. So what they'll do is they'll upload that 2,000 pixel by 1,000 pixel image, and then that's what WordPress has to work with. It's loading that size of an image, which is huge, right? That could be 30, 40 megs. So it's a huge, huge file, and it squishes it down into a 200, 300 by 200 or whatever the dimensions are. And there's no reason for that. Instead, what you should do is first use something like Pixlr, which if you don't have Photoshop, Pixlr is a great free alternative. It's pixlr.com. But go through, use Pixlr, and you can just resize the image really quickly. So take that 2,000 pixel wide image, turn it to a 200 pixel wide image, and then you can upload that 200 pixel wide image. It'll be a whole lot smaller. It'll be much, much faster to load. And actually, even though it's not on this list, that's almost one of the biggest tips, because most people get a little squirrely over images, and they just don't realize that. And it is one of the fastest ways to improve loading of a site. Next is JavaScript placement. Again, a little technical, but if you have the ability, just push your JavaScript down to the bottom, because what will happen, and this depends, and this is, again, for those of you who might be a little bit more intermediate, things like Google Analytics, things like Visual Website Optimizer, tools that have tracking codes that they need placed on your site. Okay, these are JavaScript. That's what JavaScript, it's pretty much written in JavaScript. And all it basically does is goes back to, it's a little piece of code that goes back to the Google server to activate whatever Google needs to do for tracking, or to activate whatever visual website optimizer needs to do for its tracking. There's two different types of JavaScript. There's synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous means it'll stop everything and it'll just fire that pixel back to Google, get whatever it needs from Google, and then once it gets whatever it needs back from Google, it will continue to load the rest of the page. And then there's asynchronous, which means it just doesn't matter. It just processes, it sends its ping off to Google, but it still continues to load your page. So pushing JavaScript down to the bottom helps with anything that is what they call synchronous code, which is the type of JavaScript that stops the loading process until it gets an answer back, and then it starts loading again. So if you take synchronous code, push it to the bottom, asynchronous code really doesn't matter because it loads whenever, and it doesn't really affect loading speed at all. Next up, sprites. Now, if you don't know what sprites are, basically what this is, you can kind of think of it like an image, a big giant image made up of all of your images on your site. And what you can do, now we don't do this, but you could do this. This is an option. It was on this this article. You can basically use this spriteme.org, and it'll go through and it'll scrub your site for all the images you have on your site. And this works out really good for, I think, static sites, maybe not blogs so much, but maybe a sales page or something like that you could use it for, and that'll help it load a little bit faster. But you basically goes through and it scrubs the page for all the images, puts them onto one big image, right? And then you use CSS to kind of cut them up and slice and dice and display them where you want them. And again, if you're not familiar with CSS, just skip this step. Enabling keep alive. So this is basically something where it keeps a connection going between your site and the server. So again, this is something we'd have to edit the htaccess file. So for those of you who are familiar with that, this will make sense. And if you're not, again, just skip it because this stuff is a little bit more advanced. And again, it's not entirely necessary. This is just like a nice to have at this point. And then finally, HTML versus PHP. So PHP, because it's a server script language or server-side language, will take a little bit longer to load. HTML doesn't. So when in doubt, you can always do it to HTML. And what you could do is with a WordPress site, you could, if you wanted, you can do a lot of split testing and using themes like OptimizePress 2.0 and all these different formats and everything you can try. When you find a page that really works well, when you find a format that works well, you can always send it to a developer, have them create an HTML version, and then just use that if you were that concerned about loading times. My guess is that broadband will get faster and faster and faster, and load times will be less and less of an issue. And I think that'll probably happen over the next couple of years as we improve in technology. Finally, very important tip, backup. You must back up your WordPress site before you make any of these changes, because plugins, they have conflicts, right? And you don't want to use a plugin like these little CSS minifiers and then have something get really screwed up on your site and then not know how to go back and fix it. Right? So normally you just deactivate the plugin, it's fine, or you can delete it, it's fine. Every once in a while, a plugin will make changes it shouldn't have made, and they're permanent somewhere, and you have no idea how to fix it. So that's why you have a backup copy of your WordPress site. You can go back and restore. So always, always, always make sure that you back up your site. Next, let's talk about Facebook. We're getting a little long in the tooth, but this is going to be a little quick on Facebook. Real quick update on Facebook. What they're starting to allow, this is for paid advertising, right? So if you're doing paid campaigns on Facebook, what they're starting to allow is really advanced targeting of customers. And you can see here by this example, you can actually go through, you can create this little audience, a custom audience that you can target, and you can say, right, and this requires pixels that they give you a little tracking code to put on the different pages so you know who's doing what, and that's how they track it. But essentially you can say, like as in this example, here's people I want to see that are going to the shop. I want to have people who have purchased belts and bags, and I want to now advertise, skirts to them or shoes or whatever else, right? So but you can target specifically this highly segmented portion of your audience, and you can have a very customized conversation to them using this technique. It's really, really going to be powerful. And Facebook when we first used Facebook ads, it was like 3-4 years ago when they first started coming out. It was just a waste of money. But now it's substantial, and it's getting from a media buying perspective. Facebook is something you need to learn because there's just an enormous amount of traffic that's on there. The sooner you jump in and start figuring that out, the better. So, and it does bring us to the end of at least the news, trends, and tips section for digital marketing this week. Thanks again for joining us for Digital Marketing This Week. We'll see you next week.